The midday sun beat down on the town of Dry Creek, turning dust to gold in the air and sweat to salt on every brow. The townsfolk gathered in the square, not for celebration, but for spectacle. The wooden auction block stood crookedly before the saloon, used more often for horses than people. But that day, a girl stood upon it. Her name was Lila Mae Carter, though no one there cared to know it. Barefoot, thin as a willow switch, her tangled hair fell into her eyes as the auctioneer barked her description like she was a stray mule. 16, maybe 17. Hard worker, good hands. Once cleaned houses for a fine family till she ran off. The crowd jeered. A man in the back spat tobacco into the dirt. Another laughed and called out, "Ain't worth 5 cents." Lila's lips trembled, but she said nothing. She'd long learned that words were dangerous things. She clutched her arms around herself, staring at the dust swirling around her bare feet. The sun burned the top of her head, and the smell of cheap whiskey and sweat filled her lungs. The auctioneer grew impatient. "Come now, gentlemen. Someone needs a girl like this." $5 starts the bid. "Who'll take her off my hands?" No one moved. He tried again, lowering his voice into a mock of sympathy. "She'll cook, clean, do as she's told. Worth more than 5 if you ask me." Still silence. Only the creak of the saloon doors and the buzz of a fly dared to interrupt the moment. Lila's heart thudded painfully. She had been passed from hand to hand her whole short life. Orphans didn't get to choose where they landed. When she ran from the last one, she thought she'd escaped forever. But here she was, sold again. And this time, no one even wanted to buy her. Just as the auctioneer sighed and started to wave her off the platform, a low voice spoke from the back. "I'll take her." The words were quiet, but they carried through the square like thunder rolling off the hills. Heads turned. A man stood apart from the crowd, his hat pulled low, his shirt dark with dust and travel. His face was unreadable, stern but not cruel. He stepped forward, boots heavy on the boards, and reached into his pocket. From it, he drew a single $5 note and laid it on the table. The auctioneer blinked, then grinned greedily. "Sold for $5? The crowd broke into laughter. "That's all she's worth." One man jeered. Another hollered, "Don't spend it all in one place, cowboy." Lila didn't laugh. She didn't even look up until the man came to stand before her. For a long moment, she waited for him to grab her wrist or demand her obedience. But he didn't. Instead, he took off his hat and spoke softly. "Come on," he said. "You're free now." She stared at him, uncertain she'd heard right. Free? No one had ever used that word for her. He didn't wait for an answer, just turned and walked toward a chestnut horse tied nearby. After a heartbeat she followed, her legs weak, her heart pounding with a fear that felt strangely like hope. The crowd's laughter faded behind her, swallowed by the wind. As she climbed onto the horse's back and felt the sun at her shoulders, she dared one small glance at the man who had bought her freedom. He said nothing more, his eyes fixed on the open road. But for the first time in her life, silence didn't feel empty. The trail out of Dry Creek wound through the canyons like a scar, narrow, hot, and endless. The man who had bought her freedom rode ahead, his shoulders squared beneath a faded duster, his hat low to block the glare. Lila followed behind on his second horse, a gentle bay mare that seemed to sense her trembling hands. They hadn't spoken since leaving town. She kept expecting him to turn around, to ask for something, to show his true reason for buying her. Men always had reasons, none of them kind. Yet every time he glanced back, it wasn't hunger she saw in his eyes. It was distance, quiet, a man used to keeping words buried deep. Hours passed beneath the burning sky. Lila's lips were dry, her throat sore from fear more than thirst. She wanted to ask where they were going, but couldn't make the words come. Questions had gotten her struck before. Silence, at least, didn't hurt. By the time the sun sank behind the red cliffs, her body ached from riding. The cowboy finally slowed and dismounted near a small creek that shimmered with evening light. He tied the horses and knelt beside the water, filling a tin cup. Then, without looking at her, he held it out. "Drink," he said simply. Lila hesitated, eyes darting to his face. The word was not a command, but an offering. Still, old instincts screamed caution. Slowly, she took the cup. The cool water burned her throat as it went down, washing away dust and tears alike. "Thank you," she whispered. He only nodded and began unpacking supplies from his saddlebag, dried meat, a small loaf of bread, and a blanket. When he spread the blanket on the ground near the fire he built, he said, "You can sleep here. I'll keep watch." That startled her. "Keep watch? For me?" His eyes flicked toward her, gray, unreadable, but calm. "Coyotes," he said simply, though they both knew he meant more than animals. She studied him through the firelight. His hands were steady as he cleaned his gun and leaned it within reach. There was a heaviness in him, like a man carrying too much silence and too many ghosts. "You never told me your name," she murmured after a long while. He poked the fire with a stick. "Wyatt Hale." She repeated it softly, as if testing the sound. "Mr. Hale, why'd you buy me?" His hand stilled. The flames threw long shadows across his face, etching the scars of a man who'd seen more than he said. After a long silence, he finally answered, "Didn't seem right, selling a person." She blinked, not sure she'd heard right. "That's all?" "That's enough." The quiet stretched between them again, but it wasn't cruel this time. It was thick with something she couldn't name. Respect, maybe, or pity. Or something gentler, born of understanding the same kind of loneliness. He reached into his saddlebag and tossed her an apple, small and bruised. "Eat," he said. "You'll need strength." Lila bit into it, and the sweetness nearly undid her. She had forgotten what kindness tasted like. As the fire crackled low, Wyatt moved to sit a little apart, hat pulled down as he watched the dark horizon. Lila lay on the blanket, the stars coming out one by one above her. For the first time in years, she wasn't waiting for footsteps in the dark. Before sleep claimed her, she whispered softly, "Thank you, Mr. Hale." He didn't answer, but she saw the corner of his mouth twitch, something almost like a smile. And in that fragile silence, Lila realized that the man who'd bought her for $5 hadn't bought her at all. He'd bought her a chance to live free. By dawn, the chill of night gave way to the pale light of morning. The fire had burned down to ash, and the sound of horses drinking at the creek broke the quiet. Wyatt Hale was already saddled and ready when Lila woke, her blanket tucked neatly around her shoulders. He didn't say much, just nodded toward the mare and said, "We've got a few hours' ride." They rode through a country that grew softer the farther they went. The jagged cliffs gave way to rolling hills dotted with mesquite and cottonwoods, their leaves whispering in the wind. To Lila, the land looked endless, and for the first time, the horizon didn't feel like a threat. It felt like escape. By midday, they reached a small valley framed by distant blue mountains. Nestled at its heart stood a ranch house, weathered wood, sagging porch, but alive with color. Chickens pecked in the yard. A windmill turned lazily beside a red barn. Smoke rose from the chimney, carrying the scent of biscuits and coffee. Lila stared, unable to speak. She hadn't seen a home in years that wasn't a place of orders and punishment. Wyatt dismounted first and gave a low whistle. From the porch, a woman appeared, gray-haired, sturdy, with the kind of no-nonsense face that could still manage warmth. "Wyatt Hale," she called out, wiping her hands on her apron. "You've gone and brought trouble again, haven't you?" Wyatt's lips twitched faintly. "Found her at the Dry Creek auction." The woman's eyes softened as she looked at Lila. "Poor child," she murmured. "Come in now. You look near starved." Inside, the house smelled of flour and coffee grounds, of wood smoke and warmth. Lila hesitated at the door until Wyatt motioned her forward. The woman, Mrs. Turner, she introduced herself as, set a plate of biscuits and eggs before her. "Eat," she said kindly. "Don't be shy. Around here, nobody's keeping count." Lila ate slowly, eyes darting between them. Wyatt stood near the window, hat still on, as if uncertain whether he belonged there himself. When she'd finished, Mrs. Turner poured her a cup of milk and asked softly, "You got folks somewhere?" Lila shook her head. "Not anymore." Mrs. Turner didn't press. She just gave a quiet nod, the way only women who've seen too much know how to. "Then you'll stay here a while. Wyatt's got plenty of work and I could use another pair of hands." Lila's eyes widened. "You mean I can stay?" Wyatt looked up from the window then. "You don't owe me a thing," he said. "Stay as long as you need. When you're ready to go, I'll see you get where you want to be." It was such a simple promise, but it hit harder than any kindness she'd known. For so long, her life had been something taken, bargained, or used. Now, someone was giving her a choice, and she didn't quite know what to do with it. The first days on the ranch were strange but healing. Lila swept floors, gathered eggs, and helped Mrs. Turner cook supper. At night, she watched Wyatt work the corral, strong, silent, moving like a man who belonged more to the land than to people. He barely spoke, but when he did, his words were steady and sure. Sometimes, she caught him looking at her, not the way men in town had, but like he was making sure she was still real, still safe. For the first time in her life, Lila slept through the night without fear of waking to cruelty. The creak of the ranch house, the distant lowing of cattle, and the soft sigh of wind through the hills became a lullaby she never knew she needed. And though she didn't know it yet, the ranch that was meant to be a stopover was becoming something else entirely. A home. For weeks, life at the Hale Ranch unfolded in quiet rhythms, morning chores, long afternoons under the sun, suppers by lamplight, and the sound of crickets filling the space between heartbeats. Lila found a kind of peace she'd never imagined existed. She learned to milk cows, to knead dough, and even to whistle for the horses, though they never came for her quite the way they did for Wyatt. Wyatt remained a man of few words, but she had come to understand his silences. There was comfort in them. He never raised his voice, never touched her without reason, and never asked about the life she'd run from. Some nights she'd see him sitting on the porch, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him, staring out across the fields like a man talking to ghosts only he could see. It was during one of those nights that trouble found them again. The sound of hooves came first, hard and fast through the stillness. Wyatt rose, hand already on the revolver at his belt. Mrs. Turner appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Lila froze where she stood, broom in hand, heart thudding painfully. A rider emerged from the darkness, a thick-set man with a scar down his jaw and eyes that glinted like coins in lamplight. He swung off his horse with the swagger of someone who'd never heard the word no. "Evenin', Hale," the man drawled. "Name's Carter Briggs. I'm looking for a girl. Runaway property belongs to a man back east. Saw her picture posted in Dry Creek. Thought I'd come collect." Wyatt's jaw tightened. "Ain't no property here," Briggs smiled, slow and cruel. "You sure? Heard tell you picked her up at auction. Paid $5. Guess that makes her yours now, don't it?" Lila's breath caught. Every word hit like a lash. She felt herself shrinking, trembling under the man's gaze. Mrs. Turner stepped forward, standing between her and the doorway, but Briggs just laughed. "Don't bother hiding her. I got papers, signed and stamped. She's worth $50 alive, twice that if I'd drag her back to the right man." Wyatt stepped down from the porch, his boots hitting the dirt with a thud. "You'll ride on," he said quietly. "Ain't no girl here for sale." Briggs's smile dropped. His hand brushed the holster at his hip. "Now listen, Hale, I ain't looking for trouble." But Wyatt moved faster than breath. The sound of his gun cocking broke the night wide open. "Then don't find it," he said. "You tell whoever sent you that she's gone. You come back and you'll be too." For a long moment, neither man moved. The wind sighed through the cottonwoods, and the ranch seemed to hold its breath. Then Briggs spat into the dirt, muttered something foul, and swung onto his horse. As he rode off into the darkness, Lila finally exhaled. Her knees gave way, and she sank onto the porch steps. Wyatt turned to her then, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "He won't be back tonight," he said. "But you should know, men like him don't quit easy." Lila looked up at him, eyes wide with fear and gratitude. "You didn't have to do that for me," she whispered. Wyatt holstered his gun, the metal glinting in the moonlight. "Didn't do it for you," he said. "Did it because it was right." But when he turned away, she saw his hand trembling slightly, the only sign of the storm still raging inside him. That night, as Lila lay awake listening to the wind against the windows, she realized something had changed. The ghosts she'd been running from had found her, but so had someone willing to stand between her and the dark. And for the first time, she wondered if maybe she wasn't running anymore. The days that followed the bounty hunter's visit carried a new kind of quiet, tense at first, then slowly turning gentle again, like a wound beginning to heal. Wyatt had said little about what happened that night. He didn't need to. His actions had spoken louder than any promise ever could. Lila worked harder than before, perhaps to prove herself, perhaps to drown out the echo of fear that still haunted her dreams. She rose before dawn to help Mrs. Turner with breakfast, fetched water from the well, and tended the garden. When Wyatt rode out to mend fences, she followed sometimes, insisting on helping. At first he tried to refuse. You don't have to, he told her one morning, handing her a pair of work gloves that were far too big. I know, she replied softly, slipping them on anyway. But I want to. Something in her tone made him stop arguing. So they worked side by side beneath the open sky, the girl who'd been sold for $5 and the man who'd bought her freedom. The more time they spent together, the more the silence between them began to change. It was no longer the kind of silence that pressed down on Lila's chest. It was the kind that let her breathe. She began to ask small questions. What made him choose this land? Did he ever get lonely? And one afternoon, as they repaired a section of broken fence, she finally asked the question that had lingered longest. Mr. Hale, why don't you talk much? Wyatt paused, squinting toward the hills. His voice when it came was rough and low. Too many words don't change a thing. Out here, quiet's worth more than talk. Lila smiled faintly. Still, sometimes quiet can feel heavy. He looked at her then, a long, steady look that made her breath catch. Yeah, he said after a moment. It can. That night, as they sat on the porch while the sun bled red and gold across the horizon, he told her more than she expected. About the war. About the wife and little boy he'd lost to fever while he was away fighting. How he came back to a house that was no longer a home and a heart that wouldn't stop hurting. I figured I'd just live quiet, he said, staring at the sky. Do my work, keep to myself. Didn't reckon on finding anyone else worth saving. Lila's throat tightened. You didn't just save me, she whispered. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost. What's that? He asked. Trust. Wyatt didn't answer right away. But his hand, rough and calloused, brushed against hers for just a moment. A brief touch, unspoken but full of meaning. It was enough to make her heart flutter in a way she didn't understand. Over the next few weeks, laughter began to find its way back into the ranch. Lila's laughter, soft, unsure at first, then freer, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. She teased Wyatt gently when he forgot to shave or tracked mud into the kitchen. Even Mrs. Turner noticed the change. You've brought life back into this place, child, the older woman said one afternoon with a knowing smile. Wyatt's been half a ghost for years. Lila blushed but said nothing. She wasn't sure she deserved that kind of praise, or that kind of man. Yet every time Wyatt's eyes met hers, something inside her steadied. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was something deeper, quieter, born from shared scars and quiet mornings and the feeling of finally belonging somewhere. By the time the first spring rains came, the ranch felt different, brighter somehow. But even as the wildflowers bloomed across the fields, both of them knew peace on the frontier was fragile. And somewhere beyond those hills, Carter Briggs and the men who'd come for her hadn't forgotten. Spring rolled across the land like a quiet blessing. Green hills, new calves, wildflowers brushing the fences with color. For a time, the danger seemed a distant memory. Wyatt had even begun to smile more often, though the smiles were small and fleeting, like they didn't quite know how to stay. Lila felt safe again, something she'd stopped believing was possible. She'd begun to hum while she worked, to braid her hair instead of hiding behind it, to laugh when Mrs. Turner teased her about the way Wyatt looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. But peace, as Wyatt always said, was a thin layer over the kind of world that still had sharp teeth. It started one afternoon when the wind carried more than just dust. Lila was in the barn brushing down one of the horses when she heard it, a distant rumble of hooves. At first she thought it was Wyatt returning early from the north pasture. But the sound grew heavier, multiplied. She stepped outside, squinting against the sunlight. 3 riders were coming fast down the trail. Her stomach turned cold. She recognized one of them even before the others came into view, Carter Briggs. The man's scar caught the light like a blade. Mrs. Turner came rushing from the house, eyes wide. Inside, Lila, now! But Lila froze. Her feet felt rooted to the earth. Wyatt wasn't here. He'd gone out early to check the cattle far up in the ridge country. The ranch was unguarded except for an old rifle and Mrs. Turner's courage. Briggs and his men rode up to the yard, dust swirling around their horses' legs. He grinned, all rotten charm and cruelty. Afternoon, ladies. Looks like the man of the house ain't home. Mrs. Turner stepped in front of Lila. You've no right to be here. Briggs tipped his hat mockingly. Funny thing about rights, ma'am. They don't count for much when there's money on the table. His eyes slid past her, fixing on Lila. Now, sweetheart, You be a good girl and come along quiet this time. Don't want anyone getting hurt. Lila's pulse thundered in her ears. Every instinct screamed to run. But she remembered the last time she ran, how it had ended with bruises, chains, and shame. Not this time. Not again. Her eyes darted toward the barn door. Wyatt's rifle leaned against the wall, half hidden behind a saddle blanket. Briggs followed her gaze and smirked. Go on, try it. Makes it more fun. Mrs. Turner's hand clamped on Lila's arm, but Lila shook free. Something in her heart had shifted since the night Wyatt stood between her and death. She wouldn't hide while someone else fought for her again. With trembling hands, she grabbed the rifle. Briggs's grin faltered when she leveled it at his chest. Leave, she said, voice steady though her whole body shook. Now. For a heartbeat, the world went still. The wind, the horses, the dust. Then Briggs laughed. You ain't got it in you, girl. But before he could move, the sharp crack of a revolver split the air. Wyatt's voice rang out from the hill above. She don't need to. He rode down hard, his horse kicking up clouds of dirt, his gun steady in his hand. Chaos broke loose. Briggs's men drew their weapons, bullets shattering fence posts and splintering wood. Lila ducked behind the trough, heart pounding. Wyatt dismounted before his horse even stopped moving, firing with deadly precision. One man fell. Another bolted. Briggs, furious, aimed for Lila, but Wyatt was faster. The shot echoed through the valley. Briggs went down, clutching his shoulder, cursing as his horse reared and fled. When the dust finally settled, Lila saw Wyatt on one knee, blood spreading darkly through his shirt. She dropped the rifle and ran to him, her hands shaking as she pressed against the wound. Wyatt, no, please. He winced, voice rough. Ain't nothing, just a graze. But the color in his face told her otherwise. As Mrs. Turner ran for bandages, Lila stayed by his side, tears blurring her vision. For the first time since that dusty auction block, she realized how much she needed him, not as her savior, but as the one person who'd ever made her believe she was worth saving. And as the blood soaked through her hands, she whispered, Don't you dare leave me now. The house was quiet except for the sound of rain tapping against the windows. It had started just after dusk, washing the blood and dust from the earth, leaving the air heavy and still. Inside, the only light came from the fire in the hearth, its glow flickering across Wyatt's pale face as he lay on the sofa, a bandage wrapped tightly around his shoulder. Lila sat beside him, her fingers stained with dried blood, her heart still thundering from the day's violence. She had refused to leave his side since Mrs. Turner stitched him up. The older woman had done her best to tend the wound, though she muttered under her breath that Wyatt had been lucky this time. Too lucky. When Mrs. Turner finally went to rest, Lila stayed, watching over him. Every rise and fall of his chest felt like a fragile miracle. Wyatt stirred, his breath catching as pain pulled him back to consciousness. Lila? He rasped. She leaned closer. I'm here. His eyes fluttered open, gray and clouded. He tried to sit up, but she pressed a trembling hand to his chest. Don't move, please, you're hurt. He managed a faint smile. Not the first time I've been shot, sweetheart. Likely won't be the last. Don't say that. Her voice broke. You could have died. For me. He studied her face, his expression soft but serious. You were worth it. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. No, I wasn't. I'm just a girl who brought you trouble. If I hadn't come here, then I'd still be sitting on that porch alone, he said quietly. You gave this place a heartbeat again. Don't ever say you ain't worth saving. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain. Lila reached for his hand, rough and calloused, warm despite the weakness in his grip. She held it tightly, afraid that letting go might make him fade away. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. All my life I thought people were born with their worth already decided. Like some of us just came into this world owing more than we'd ever be allowed to pay. But you make me think maybe I was wrong. He looked at her with something deeper than kindness, something that saw every bruise, every scar, and called it strength. You were never the one in debt, Lila, he said. The world just made you think so. Her throat ached with emotion. She wanted to tell him what he'd come to mean to her, that his silence had become her peace, his steadiness her safety, and his presence the home she never had. But the words tangled in her chest, too big to say out loud. Instead, she just whispered, Thank you. Wyatt's eyes softened. Don't thank me. Just promise me something. Anything. If something ever happens to me, you don't go back to hiding. You keep living, you hear? You take this land, make it yours. Don't let anyone tell you who you are again. Lila shook her head fiercely, tears spilling down her cheeks. Don't you talk like that. You're not going anywhere. A faint chuckle escaped him, low and tender. Bossy little thing. His eyelids grew heavy, his strength fading. Reminds me of someone I used to know. She brushed a damp strand of hair from his forehead, her hand trembling. Sleep, Wyatt, please. And when he finally drifted into rest, she stayed awake, keeping watch just as he once had for her. The night stretched long, and the rain softened to a gentle hush. By dawn, the storm had passed. Wyatt's breathing was steady, his color better. Relief washed over her, so fierce it nearly stole her breath. She looked out at the hills, washed clean, reborn, and whispered to the rising sun, You saved me. Wyatt Hale, now I'll save you right back. And from that moment on, Lila Carter vowed that the man who'd bought her freedom would never stand alone again. The sun rose slow and golden over the Turner Ranch, spilling light across the wet earth like a promise of something new. The storm had scrubbed the land clean, leaving the air sweet with sage and wildflowers. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and for the first time in months, the ranch felt alive again, like the ghosts that once haunted its corners had finally been put to rest. Wyatt sat on the porch, his arm still bandaged but healing. A blanket draped over his shoulders, and his old hat rested loosely on his knee. Every now and then he'd take in a slow, steady breath, grateful just to be here, still standing, still breathing. Inside, he heard laughter. Not loud or wild, but soft and musical, the kind that belonged to peace, not pain. Lila was humming as she worked, her bare feet padding across the wooden floorboards, her hair loose and shining in the morning light. She had been up before dawn, tending to the animals, collecting eggs, mending a torn shirt. There was something steady about her now, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. When she stepped onto the porch carrying 2 mugs of coffee, Wyatt smiled. You're getting good at that, he said, nodding toward the coffee. She smiled back, handing him a mug. Well, I learned from the best. Though you still make it stronger. He took a slow sip, pretending to wince. Guess I like mine with more grit than flavor, Lila laughed, her eyes shining. The sound made his chest ache in the best way, a reminder that he hadn't fought for nothing. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sunlight creep over the hills. It was the kind of silence that didn't need filling, the kind that spoke louder than words ever could. After a long moment, Lila set down her mug. I've been thinking, she said softly. That sounds dangerous. She nudged him with her shoulder, smiling. I'm serious, Wyatt, about what's next. He turned his head, watching her carefully. What is next? I want to stay, she said. Her voice trembled just a little, but her eyes were steady. Not because I owe you, and not because I've got nowhere else to go. But because this feels like home. I want to build something here, a place that's ours. Wyatt looked down, his fingers tightening around his mug. He had expected her to leave one day, to find her own path once she was strong enough. Hearing her say she wanted to stay hit deeper than he was ready for. You sure? He asked quietly. This land's got more work than peace, and I ain't exactly an easy man to live with. I'm sure, she said simply. I've had enough of running. And you? She met his gaze, her eyes soft but fierce. You're not the man folks think you are. You saved me when no one else would. Now it's my turn. Something in him broke open then, the last wall he'd built to keep people out. He reached for her hand, his rough palm closing around her smaller one. I didn't save you, Lila, he said. You saved me right back. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she smiled, slow and true. Guess we saved each other then. They sat like that as the morning grew warmer, the light spilling golden across the land. Somewhere in the distance, a colt whinnied, and the sound carried over the fields like laughter. The Turner Ranch, once a place of silence and sorrow, now echoed with the sounds of life. Lila glanced toward the horizon, where the world stretched wide and full of promise. $5, she murmured. That's what they said I was worth. Wyatt chuckled low in his throat. Guess they undersold you by a lifetime. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he let his arm rest around her, careful not to touch the wound still healing. The sky brightened, the land shimmered, And the past, cruel and cold, finally loosened its hold, and just like that, two broken souls who'd been sold, scarred, and silenced found something worth more than freedom itself. They found home,